Well, welcome to the Governance Committee. And we are mostly remote today, so Suzanne Woodward is here, and I am here. I'm Vince Lombardi, and I'm acting chair. We will have a meeting, but no actions can be taken at this meeting because we don't have a quorum in the room.
Hold on a second. I don't see the recording light on, so while he was flashing that we're up, there we go. We've
Is it
got
on?
recording now.
Start over?
You can start over. How's that?
Okay. Welcome to the Governance Committee meeting. We are mostly on Zoom, and so we will not be taking any actions today, but we will have our meeting. I'd like to do a roll call. Councilor Cook,
Present.
Councilor Tabor,
Here.
and I'm Vince Lombardi, and I'm here. Okay. We can do the approval of minutes from the 14th and the 28th. Are there any comments on those minutes?
Yeah, we can't vote on the minutes.
Oh, we
because
can't?
we
I
don't
thought you
have a
said we
quorum.
could.
No, I'm sorry if
Okay.
I was not clear. We can't vote on the minutes.
Are there any comments on on those minutes? I have none. Okay, well then, let's get into the rules, the City Council Rules of Procedure, and we're going to do a line-by-line review.
And do you need me to pull them up from somewhere, or Kate, do you have them and want to screen share? What's your preference?
Either way, I have them up. I can screen share or.
Why don't you
can
try
pull them
that?
up either way.
Why don't you give that a go, since I'll be taking some notes.
Okay. So can everyone see these?
Yes, perfect.
Yes, works well.
Okay. Here, I'm going to try to move them on my screen so that I can see them better. There we go. Okay. So I met with legal counsel to go through the rules and orders of the city council, and we discussed all the questions that we had in the last meeting of the governance committee. So the first rule that would impact is Rule 3. There was a section in Rule 3 that specified, and you can see kind of here on the side what was deleted, specified allowance of polling, but it conflicts with our rules about not having a vote during a work session of the council. So we decided that legally we shouldn't have a section allowing for an informal vote if there's no vote, because that's a polling of the council. Does anyone have any questions about this change in Rule 3?
I think that's appropriate.
Would this bar whoever's chairing from the meeting from asking counselors how they feel about a certain project or proposal?
No, I think we can have discussion, we just can't vote.
Certainly no vote. I think that would be against our rules.
Yes.
But getting a feel for the room, I think, is valuable at times.
I
Counselor?
don't believe this would limit discussion at all.
Let me ask Suzanne about that.
So I think you are fine to kind of get a sense of the room, and it really is a question of how much leeway, frankly, you want to give the mayor in terms of conducting that. I think everything short of a vote is really up to the discretion of the mayor and these rules and how you want to frame the conversation. My sense is from what I'm hearing, and apologies for not being at the last meeting, is you're looking to make sure you don't get too close to that line of a vote by polling, but still looking for some feedback, I think, in terms of, for example, whether the project is of interest to the city council, or that sort of direction, I guess, or how to guide the city manager in some further policy discussion, or bringing it forward to city council. Is that kind of where we're going?
Yes, I think the concern is around making sure that, we don't violate any rules on having, in a quorum setting, have a polling of the council where you can't, where you shouldn't be voting on an action. So, and so just, we don't want to cross that line, but it's perfectly reasonable for people, I think, with it written, with this change, taking out that one line, to still express their views and ask questions during a work session.
Okay. Why don't you continue then?
Okay. The next council rule that I was looking at, and I want to come back to Rule 7 because I think we'll have more discussion around Rule 7. I want to go to Rule 13. Disposition of motions. I've divided this down. I'm double checking, sorry, just a second. I'm double checking that that's accurate. Yes, into A and B and under Rule 13. Here. It leaves the first section as is. The second section, in conversation with legal counsel, we decided we needed to define what a friendly amendment is, because we hadn't been in a position that that's ever been defined for our council. It's been a practice that we followed for years. But then there are questions around, okay, so who accepts? Does it have to be the person making the motion and their second, or not? Is there any authority to object? Therefore, are you removing the authority of other council members to act on a friendly amendment? And so the way that we wrote this was we defined a friendly amendment first. A friendly amendment is one in which the councilor amending the motion and the originator of the motion and the second agree on the change. And then we said friendly amendments accepted by the originator of the motion shall be voted by the whole if any member of the council requests a vote on the amendment. So even if it's a friendly amendment, this allows to proceed in the manner that we have proceeded in most cases, unless somebody has a question or an objection to that friendly amendment. And then it would just be considered as a regular amendment, essentially. Because if somebody has that objection, then you can ask for a vote on the amendment. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Yes?
I think it's good that that a counselor can call for a vote on it, on the friendly amendment. I think that's an important step.
Yes, I think the goal is just to make sure that we don't remove anyone's voice in discussions accidentally. I think that's the concern, because you can get involved in several rounds of friendly amendments and you just don't know. You want to make sure everybody is okay with those friendly amendments. That's our goal here. Rule 14.
And that,
Yes.
and that squares with Roberts?
It does. It does, according to Bob. He thought that this was reasonable as far as a rule.
Maybe we should distinguish between Robert and Roberts.
Between Robert's rules and
call the attorney Bob.
Bob Sullivan, the city attorney. So I think that this is, I should note that we can set our own rules as a council will do. So this would be our rule as a council. And our city attorney didn't think that there was a problem with Robert's rules and this rule. In fact, he noted that it was interesting because not many City councils actually have friendly amendments, that it's unusual that we have this in practice, yet we've never defined it, and it hasn't been in our set of rules.
Good.
Rule 14, motions during debate. There was a question around what privilege is. And in working with the city attorney on this, we went through all the possible definitions of privilege and determined ultimately what we do mean here is a point of personal privilege. For example, if someone needs to leave briefly to use the restroom during a meeting. So you request for, you ask for a point of personal privilege in that case. So we just put personal in here to clarify, in case there was any further question around that rule. Does anyone have any ideas or thoughts on that?
Perfect.
It's good.
Okay. Rule 21, conflicts of interest. There was a question around whether or not we should specifically mention ethics here in the ethics process. And in that conversation, we determined that there are additional provisions in the city charter and the ethics ordinance. I put this note in here for our reference, just so that everyone would know that we can include a note in the rules and leave a note like this in the rules if we would like. But it doesn't change Rule 21. Or we could just take that out and everybody now knows that the reason we didn't change it is because there are other provisions
Would it
related
be,
to it.
excuse me, would it be reasonable to cite the, where in the ordinance that is? Or is that
Yeah.
within that so that there's a quick reference there?
Yeah, I would have no objection to citing where it is in the ordinance for convenient reference.
Putting a note in here, cite for reference.
Yep.
So I will go back and make sure that we get the right citations there. Any other questions?
Not for me.
Okay. Rule 32, taxing, spending, and borrowing. There have been questions in the past around whether or not an expenditure is, if the council votes on something that causes an expenditure, but that expenditure hasn't occurred, do we reach 2/3 threshold for voting? And so we were trying to clarify this around taxing, spending, and borrowing. Whenever you have a foreseeable expenditure, you should have a 2/3 vote of the council. So that adds this line. In addition, for any motion for which it is reasonably foreseen that an action will alter the city budget, the motion shall require a 2/3 vote of the city council.
Yeah, Councilor Cook, I read this and I think the intent we're looking for would be if it's reasonably foreseen that the action would exceed the amount that council's appropriated for city spending in the budget, right?
Yes.
Because alter, was a little bit, I thought we might benefit by clarifying a little more that it's, if we're going to go over what the budget's been appropriated to spend.
Okay. So I'm going to highlight this here for me. I think that, this would be even a higher threshold. So anything that we voted on that changed the budget at all would require 2/3, even if it didn't exceed appropriation. That might be an unreasonable standard. Might be a little high of a standard if you're shifting.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be concerned, I think in our city manager form of government, I think if the city manager wants to move money around, she has that authority. She just can't exceed the appropriated amount. Maybe Suzanne can chime in on that.
Yeah, I would concur with that, Counselor Tabor, and I will say I too had questioned about what alter the city budget meant in this context. For example, certainly there were a number of instances where the city might come forward with a project or a proposal to make some change to a roadway. And we may be moving money from one line item, a project to another. It doesn't change the total dollar that has already been appropriated for, say, roadways, but we are changing the projects that we're going to do it on, or spending a little more for paving one road versus another, or doing special testing. I could see a number of occasions where we asked for the city council's input on different projects, and it would have budgetary impacts, but not beyond the budget. And I think that kind of gets to Councillor Tabor's point of there's the moving within the already appropriated amounts versus, something that is going to have a significant expense that would require some supplemental appropriation. So I think that's the challenge of trying to figure that one out there.
So language more around like exceed appropriations. In the city budget. Maybe exceed total appropriations in the city budget. I don't know that we want that either.
Yeah, I'm trying to noodle this out. What would,
Why don't you just mark that, and that seems to me that that's going to take a little
noodling out?
noodling, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, my sense has been, if we agree on a $129 million budget and the level of spending involved in that, that we don't direct the city manager how to spend that within departments or between departments or line by line. And that seems to have worked pretty well for us.
I will revisit this one again with the legal department and see if we can put in some clarifying language. Whether or not we need to say total appropriations or what we need to say here. Is it reasonable, do you think it's reasonable to have this provision here requiring a 2/3 vote? Should we get the language correct?
I've always understood that if we were going to go over the appropriated total budget, we required a 2/3 vote. Maybe Suzanne can enlighten me on that, but I think that's been brought up before.
I think the issue was that this was for an anticipated going over, and I think where this was derived from was that there were the potential for legal fees, whereas we didn't have, according to Bob, Attorney Bob, he said that there were no invoices in that meeting, and so therefore we had the discussion of unanticipated expenses or anticipated expenses of significant legal costs. So I think this was derived from that to include
Right.
not just having to have invoices in hand, but a fairly definite, anticipated, and how you, I don't know how you
But would-
define that.
Wouldn't you have to have a concurrent supplemental appropriation? In other words, when we authorized taking on the 40,000 a month to carry the McIntyre building, we needed a supplemental appropriation for that, which we then voted. And here we've got a situation where we can foresee we're going to need a supplemental appropriation.
I think that the challenge is you had a very unusual and atypical situation, and we're going to have to be extra careful in the drafting so that bad facts don't make bad law, so to speak, in terms of the rule of the law here. And I'm wrestling in my own mind because I just looked at this now, how to get at the concern that arose at the time the action was taken last year that caused concern about budgeted amounts, without undoing the city manager form of government and the division of responsibilities in the charter. I'd say let's noodle this a little more, and it may help maybe if we bring in finance as well and kind of put our collective heads together, if there's a way to tackle this one that tries to thread the needle here. Because it is it's a challenging one to do, because we do, you as a city council, certainly may have any number of 5-4 votes in terms of policy directions for which there's adequate money for both policy directions. And, you don't want to get in a place of not allowing work to go forward, and always needing that 2/3 once you've done the real hard work of setting the budget at the beginning of the year. You don't want to tangle yourself up too much. So.
Right.
I'm just gonna, if you don't mind, Chairman Lombardi, I'm just gonna take a 2-minute break, if that's okay with everybody.
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
I will go back and get further direction on this with legal and finance, and report back on our next meeting
Okay.
With this and any other changes to the rules. I think the next one we can probably cover pretty quickly, and it's not, I don't think it's something that Councilor Chamber probably feels the need to weigh in on. Rule 34, this was a clarification. We had said including work sessions and executive sessions. Executive sessions are what we used to call non-public sessions of the council, and now we call them non-public sessions. So we just put in the word non-public instead of executive to clarify.
That's fine. I raised that question because I just didn't know what it meant. To be an executive session. Having been on many nonprofit boards, that meant something different.
Yep.
I think it was important here to clarify this, actually. It's anything that we have in the rules that are confusing needs to be clarified, because the rules should be understood to the council and to all of our residents. So I think this just makes this much more clear.
Thank you.
And the next one is Rule 41, addressed by the public. This is one that Councilor Tabor expressed a view on at our last meeting around leaving it as is and allowing members to address the council with just a majority vote, members of the public. And Councilor Tabor, we're on Rule 41, and this is one that you had commented on at our last meeting about leaving it as is. I spoke with the city attorney about this as well. While this isn't standard practice, it allows for more flexibility, and so there's no reason not to leave it. So we can leave it in even if we're in the standard practice of suspending the rules, but this would allow for somebody to ask for just a majority vote instead of a suspension of the rules.
I think that's great. Yep.
Looks good.
Any other concerns?
I think that's good.
Yeah.
Okay. Public comment. This is one of those that I had more significant changes in this public comment section. Initially, I had not proposed any changes around section A on public comment, but I then altered section A to meet with the changes in section B. So this change in section A is really a reflection on the change in section B. The only change to public comment would be that public comment shall appear on the agenda of every council meeting in which there is not a pre-scheduled public dialogue session, so that you're not having both, because each are envisioned to be about 45 minutes of time for the public to interact with council members and to express viewpoints. So the goal of this is to make sure we have that public interaction, whether it be public dialogue or public comment, but not have both at one meeting of the council. Then I altered section B to say that public dialogue would be a session before the regular city council meetings and or city council work sessions. So it could be either or we can also have, this is a question I have here, you could have public dialogue at any other time, any other noticed public meeting. So it doesn't have to be necessarily a city council meeting. It doesn't necessarily have to be a work session of the city council. That would allow more flexibility, I think, around having public dialogue sessions outside of council chambers in other locations. So say you wanted to have a public dialogue session before a citywide neighborhood meeting, for example. So that's a public noticed meeting. The city council could schedule public dialogue before that meeting. But at those public dialogue sessions, you would have no more than 3 members of the council present. This is in an effort not to create quorum. And the reason we don't want to create quorum is as soon as we create quorum with public dialogue, then we have provisions around taking minutes and recording those meetings, which is a considerable burden on city staff. And finding ways to record an informal dialogue is also extremely difficult to record it accurately in those sessions. So this would be a very informal mechanism for discussion with city council members. And since it's only 3 members and no more than 3 members of the council at a time, you don't need to take minutes, but we need to make sure that we have clear guidance on who is participating in each public dialogue. And so we clarify.
You froze.
Session. What?
You froze for a minute there.
Oh,
You're
sorry.
back. That's okay. Could be
Okay.
your end.
So we clarified who should participate in the public dialogue by saying that the mayor shall determine which city council members participate in each dialogue session on a rotational basis, with the requirement that all city councilors participate in at least one public dialogue session in a calendar year. And the reason that I put this language in specifically is that given work obligations, some city councilors will have more difficulty participating in public dialogue session that starts before a work session, specifically since work sessions start earlier, or before another noticed meeting that may start at 5 p.m. Some councilors won't have the time at 4 p.m. So it's helpful to let that be a little more flexible and allow the mayor to schedule that. I'm assuming that the mayor will have conversations with councilors to do that. But also, you don't want to put the requirement that city councilors participate. I think that it's reasonable to say that you participate in at least one in a year. But more than that, I think would be difficult to require of somebody who we're already requiring a lot of city council meetings of, especially for somebody whose work schedule may be such that they work till 6 p.m. So that's kind of where I landed. I would love to have some discussion around this.
A couple of thoughts. Well, it'll be interesting to see if the council, when we discuss it at the council level, wants to alternate public comment and public dialogue. That means that half of our public input process would be through public dialogue. Myself, I'm not sure that we want to remove that much public comment, maybe quarterly, but that's just my preference. I think it'd be up to the council as a whole. The 2017 council did alternate, and one of the features they had was that those involved in the dialogue came back to the dais and reported what the comments were, and I think that's valuable because then residents who've been part of the discussion know that their comments go back to the whole council. So those are two thoughts.
I guess my thought was that I like the idea of it being out in the city and in the neighborhoods, and that would be a very positive thing to do. I think I would suggest not having it every other meeting. I think that would be a lot, and would tend to, I don't know. And we have 2 meetings a month, or more. So, 2 scheduled meetings a month, so.
I think that it's reasonable to not have it every other meeting. And that's what we were trying to have remove any specificity around the number of times that you have to have public dialogue versus public comment, and when you have to have it versus having public comment. Because I think that this is an area where it depends on the council. Different councils have different interests around public dialogue and public comment, and different obligations depending upon what their current work schedule is, what they're working on at the time. One of the challenges is you can't have public dialogue if you have non-public sessions of the council, because everyone has to be present at non-public session before the city council session. So I think that public dialogue becomes difficult on public prior to a council session. I'd like having some more flexibility around that so that public dialogue can occur at other times before any noticed meeting. And then in that case, say you have a public dialogue session before a citywide neighborhood committee meeting, that clearly does not replace public comment at a city council meeting. The only time that it would replace public comment is when you have it immediately prior to city council meeting. That way the issues at hand there's room to address those with the public. So what I was trying to do is create a lot more flexibility here for the council. But then I think that what this has to be followed by is a scheduling of public dialogue sessions through the year. So this recommendation to the council to change this format should also include a recommendation that maybe we schedule public dialogue at this time, through the year. And so that we make sure we have a public dialogue for residents who are more comfortable participating and discussing things with council in this format. So at least that's my thinking around it.
I guess I would add to that, that I would like to see it out in the various wards and make sure we visit different neighborhoods and have that scheduled so that in advance, so that people in those neighborhoods would be very well aware of it and have the opportunity to come.
Yeah, I concur with Councilor Lombardi that it'd be great to get these out into the neighborhoods. Maybe Deputy City Manager Woodland can answer the question. Is there any prohibition from us having the whole council meeting, start to finish, out in the wards on a rotating basis?
So let me give you a couple of thoughts. So let me start with the last one, which is the technology is arriving to allow us to hold city council meetings outside of City Hall. So that technology is on the way, and we hope to test it probably in April amongst ourselves before we roll out to the city council as an option. But those pieces are in the works to make that happen. As someone, who participated now or viewed for many years the public comment session and then the public dialogue, my suggestion for consideration is don't touch public comment, just leave public comment as it is. And I think part of that is when I sat through some of the dialogue sessions, not everyone got heard just because of the time pressures. And yet if you've got something on the agenda or something that's really important to you that you've bothered to show up to the city council meeting, 3 minutes, it can be long when 45 people show up, but for the average meeting, I think that public comment session does, people can count on it and not have to look, is this a public dialogue session, but my issue is up. I kind of like, having that space where the city council gets to hear from individual residents regardless. They can count on it, and it's always a forum and a venue open for residents and business owners, stakeholders to come in and speak to the whole city council. Very reliable and predictable. In terms of the public dialogue piece, I do like what I'm hearing from all of you, which is how to get out into the communities, make yourselves as city councilors a little more accessible, to allow folks to more easily engage with that. So maybe you just disconnect the two. There are the city council meetings which have a city comment section, and as they have traditionally had, and then you build in this public dialogue piece wherever you as a city council think it would be most effective to have those conversations with our stakeholders, our residents, and I think it can be built around other public meetings that are already taking place. And we may not always have the best video capability in those other places, but that's okay if it's going to be just 3 of you and then reporting back. I like the reporting back in a full city council meeting. You still could do that. There's no reason why one of the 3 city councilors doesn't put under their name, or however we wind up doing the agenda, a report back on a dialogue session that happened, the prior week or the prior 2 weeks out in a neighborhood, or however you decide to unfold that. So that's just kind of some thinking.
I would also say I like the idea of having the city council meeting in various places too, certainly. And we could do that in different wards, for example.
I agree with you, Suzanne, that, my concern had been if we replace public comment with public dialogue, and then 5 days before the council meeting, we need to have a non-public. Boom, there's no opportunity for citizen input. So I also am coming around to the point of view of keep public comment sacrosanct, and public dialogue is something we add on a regular basis. It's noticed so people can attend, and we report back.
I think that's entirely reasonable. Yes, I think the goal was more to increase discussion, not decrease discussion here. So if there is any concern around this section in which there is not a pre-scheduled public dialogue session, I'm happy to take that out and leave it as is, and then be in a situation where we are just having public dialogue as a separate entity entirely. I think that's entirely reasonable, and then people have just more opportunity, because I think that's truly the goal, giving people opportunity, especially people who are not necessarily comfortable coming and providing us their opinions at public comment, giving them a different type of forum for that.
Yeah, and if I may, I think, not everyone is comfortable being in front of a camera. So the fact that you can have a conversation with a couple of city councilors, without the camera on, might actually, for some people, feel more accessible.
Good. I think you have some more work to do, Kate.
Okay, happy to do it. And I'll go back. I think that the section on public dialogue does capture what we've been discussing here. But I will maybe add some clarifying language around purpose here. I don't think there are very many more changes. We'll go back to agenda in a second. The last one is Rule 47. In discussion with legal, I think there was a question around limitations of 10 or more consecutive years and losing valuable input from people who have served for long periods of time on our boards. Especially since individuals are reconsidered in any case by the mayor and by the council when they're reappointed. So we removed language around limitation for serving 10 consecutive years, and clarified that all vacancies in boards and commissions shall be publicly advertised, which is already the case. It's more just of clarification so that everyone understands this is the practice that we believe we should have. They're all publicly advertised. If the mayor selects somebody who's already served 10 or more years, that's intentional. And it just kind of goes with standard practice, I think, at this point, but doesn't force us into a position of necessarily reconsidering someone's service if they've served 10 years. Does that make sense?
To me, it does.
Can I just, I should know the answer to this question, but since you've talked to Bob, the publicly advertised, does that actually require an advertisement in the newspaper or just on our website?
I haven't asked what that actually requires. I think currently we do advertise in both places. At least that's what I found when I was researching advertisements for vacancies. I don't know how many times we do that. And I can ask that question of the city clerk.
Yeah, because we have a lot of boards and commissions, and I'm not sure that we, and maybe the clerk's office does it, and I just don't know about it, which is quite possible.
I will double check. For some reason, I do think that for boards and commissions we do, because we usually receive them in the board packet. But clearly we don't for committees.
And then maybe that's the terminology here.
Yeah.
There's the
Yeah.
land use boards and other statutorily required ones, and then there's a lot of blue ribbon committees and other things. Okay.
Yeah. And so now yes, go ahead.
I'm just trying to remember where the rule is about advertising. I mean, we amended that rule to include the website. I don't know whether, I mean, if you,
I can go back.
I'm just thinking, you know, I don't know where the Portsmouth Herald is going, you know, and whether it's even going to be available. So to have a requirement that it be in the newspaper, I think in that, whatever rule that was, we talked about emphasizing the fact that it means also through the webpage.
Yes, I believe we did clarify that this year. I'll have to go back and look and see which rule that is that we clarified. But we did clarify it to include electronic advertising. And that currently is the practice. But I will double check with the city clerk. I want to make sure the city clerk is very comfortable with this
Good.
change.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I think that that's a reasonable question. And I don't immediately see where that clarification was. So I will double check with her too.
Yeah, I always want to make sure we've got money in the budget for the advertising, if it's the paid kind versus the putting it on our website, pushing it out in our newsletter and our other vehicles of communication, so.
Although in general, I think we should make sure we are advertising all those positions.
Agreed. It's just making sure I understand what you want, yeah, and what's done.
I think our intent should be that whenever we have an opening on a board or commission, there's wide public notice so that we get all people who are interested. I think we want to avoid a situation where the mayor has the mayor has appointments in his pocket, so to speak, and we're not getting applications from everybody that we could. I think we want to get the broadest possible input. And to that end, there is value in the print medium. But it can't do it alone. We need the electronic dissemination too. But that's just speaking as a newspaper guy. So.
I love it. Okay, so I will report back. The last one I wanted to cover is Rule 7. I've been working to try to find a way to streamline the order of business, just to tighten up our meetings some, time-wise. And this is just a suggestion, but one of the suggestions that I thought was reasonable to consider was moving all city council and city manager items that require action under one subheading, action items. And instead of appearing under individual city councilors' names or under the city manager's names, their name would be highlighted after the item in parentheses, whose item that was to discuss. That would allow the mayor to know who to turn to for each action item. but it would streamline the agenda some, and it would move all actions together during the council sessions.
So this is the one I looked at and said, oh, this could be tricky. And it's, as someone who works on putting together an agenda and trying to, prepare the comments. The city manager does comments for her action items that are sometimes fairly detailed in terms of this, license or easement is needed, here's some background on the project, and here's the action requested. It seemed to me that it might be a little confusing in terms of how we put things together if there wasn't some kind of clear either separation or denotation of her items versus the counselor-generated items. So that was my initial thinking. So I'll stop there.
Any other comments?
I had
Yeah.
some of the same reaction. I thought, I think there's value in a dedicated agenda item for city manager items. Here, straight up serve the city, city staff, and some of them have deadlines. So I would be concerned that we could get into some council items, have to extend a meeting or have a meeting break into two parts, and the city manager would not have been able to get items under her name taken care of in a timely manner. And I also think that there are items that she needs to bring to her council to get decisions, and making that a regular, clearly delineated part of the meeting, I think has value.
So what I'm hearing is concern about the differences in action items if they come from the city manager versus council members, and making sure that we address the city manager's items first, which is what we shifted this year anyway in the order of business. My particular concern around action items is the way that we currently have it separated out puts city councilors in a position that they feel a need to bring forward actions before the council, sometimes even when they don't have particular items to bring forward. Otherwise, they might have the only name that's not on the agenda for that session. So it increases orders of business rather than putting us in a situation where we only bring forward issues that should be addressed or that we're really interested in having addressed. So I was trying to limit that and make sure that counselors are only bringing forth items that they want to discuss, and therefore just kind of streamlining the way those are addressed. If there's specific concerns around the difference in appearance of action items coming from the city manager versus action items coming from the council, we can go back to the way it was. We can look for other ways to streamline this process. I know that one of those other ways is to ask for the consent agenda to be adopted by one motion rather than going through the individual items in the consent agenda, which fortunately we did at our last council session. I think that's the first one this year that we've done that. So we can streamline in a few other ways the council sessions. But I'm just trying to find ways to make this, our time, to use our time more efficiently is all I was trying to do.
Yes.
I'm wondering if I hear you right, Councillor Cook, part of it is distinguishing between, items for consideration that are actually, that either the city manager or councilors are actually looking for a vote, and maybe other items that the city councilors just want to discuss, in which case, if it's just discussion, if a city council wants to bring up something he or she has read, if they've gone to a conference and are reporting back, maybe there's another section, before or after the city manager's informational items that is kind of the other bucket for city council pieces that are informational. I went to a conference, I'm reporting back. I did the public dialogue session, and, I was the note keeper, and here's what we learned. And then maybe the action items is twofold. There's a city manager section and a city councilor section. I don't know. I'm trying to suss it out here, because it sounds like you're trying to tease out or put a point on what it is the city councilor is really looking for, an action or just a report back kind of item.
Right. I mean, that's kind of what I'm trying to suss out. What are really truly our action items that the council needs to address versus what are reports back, which I think report backs are really important. And in some cases, maybe they, like when we have volunteer committee reports, they come before actions of the council. But sometimes that report back, the city manager's informational items here, you could also have city council informational items. It's reasonable to have, like here at the top in section 2, we have public dialogue session. Here, we don't have a provision for report back for things like public dialogue session, but you could have recognitions, volunteer committee reports, report back from public dialogue here. So that way it's always included before the action items are voted for the council. In case there's anything that's coming up in action items, it was discussed in public dialogue. I think we always try to make sure we have public comment and everything around public comment before we take action on items, and that would be kind of in the same vein. Maybe we have action items and we divide out action items between the city manager and the council. So we have, subsection A, action items A, city manager, action item B, city council. And then we have the report backs. We change recognitions, volunteer committee reports, public dialogue, but maybe we also have report outs from committee here before public comment session. Because that's something that city councilors do regularly bring back to the council. And their report outs, not really action items. So maybe we have that before we get to action items. I don't know if that's, and then we can have city managers informational items and city councilors informational items, which would be not committee reports, but things like, I attended an interesting workshop on city council at, for the state of New Hampshire, and I'm reporting back on that. That would be something entirely different. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that
I think that might work.
might work.
I understand your concern that by putting agenda items there, we're creating opportunities, and maybe we're encouraging more items to take up than we ought to. But I can think of 5-4 councils in makeup, or 8-1 councils where, oftentimes the councilors representing the 4 have people who really have items that they want brought to the full city council. And it serves a valuable purpose. And I can think of city manager items like supplemental appropriations or bond issues that we had to get done by certain times that are very timely. So I can see the sense of having both.
And I want everyone to know, I'm not trying to eliminate the opportunity for city councilors to bring things forward. This would be.
No, but that's already in section 4. It's very clear.
Yeah.
But also, government is inefficient and sometimes you want it that way.
It's true. More discussion is sometimes better. Okay, so I'll go back and revisit this again. I'll see if I can find ways to clarify better. Maybe I'll have a conversation with the deputy city attorney around this before our next meeting. That's the last rules recommendation. So I'm going to turn it back over to Councilor Lombardi.
Thank you, Councilor Cook. The next item is the ethics process. Councilor Tabor and I met with Attorney Sullivan and reviewed the whole ethics process, and I think everyone received the memorandum from the city attorney. And John, do you want to speak to that?
Well, I think we took up what this governance committee had talked about last time, and I can just go through them quickly one by one.
Is it possible to put that on the screen? Do you have that, Suzanne?
I have it.
Okay,
If you want me to share it, I think.
okay. I was going to say, I would say no, because I think she just brought down the rules.
I have it here. I'll share it if I can. There.
Yep. Got it.
Great.
Thank you.
I just have to, I'm working by phone here, so. Our first major item was in the ethics complaint process, a citizen or a fellow counselor or anyone makes the ethics complaint, and then it goes to the mayor and the city attorney, and then it only advances if one of the two of them or both feel it merits an ethics investigation. We heard from Nancy Pearson, who participated in the 2020 ethics process, that it's a big burden for the complainant to carry the burden of proof. And so in our discussion, we came up with this idea, and I don't think any other city that I know of in New Hampshire does it, but of an appointed investigator who, once the mayor and or city attorney say the claim has merit, a neutral third-party investigator would then, who would stand by appointment of the mayor through the mayor's term and be on tap and would have the requisite background, would gather the facts. And after gathering the facts, write a report, and that would go to the ethics board. And then the board would weigh that and make their finding. And the ethics committee could call additional witnesses. They could ask for elaboration. They could call the complainant or the defendant. But it would relieve the person making the complaint of the burden of putting the whole case together. And it would speed the process and perhaps provide a lot of factual information for the ethics committee to base their decision on. So we thought that was a novel idea, and we thought it had some merit. It doesn't take away the ethics committee's powers. It simply adds the legwork, so to speak, to put the case together. That was, we spent a lot of time discussing that. We talked about when the ethics committee makes a finding and it goes to the city council or the governing body, if it's one of the boards or commissions, they have to decide the action. I think we were all in agreement, and we would strongly recommend that if the defendant is on the governing body, they have to recuse themselves. And anyone with close personal ties or financial ties to the defendant has to recuse themselves. I'm having difficulty reading that.
Oh.
What's our next one?
I would, John, I would just add that this investigator would have full powers of discovery, so that they could really do the work of defining the ethics problem, so I think that's an important point
Right.
before you go on to the.
Yep.
I wanted to note for the committee that I noticed that Esther Kennedy is on the call this week. I don't know if she wants to participate. I would note that last time we met, we noticed that Nancy Pearson was on, and we offered her the opportunity to take part in the discussion. I would just note that if Esther does want to participate in adding her views, I think it would be good to also include her and any comments that she has as part of our discussion today.
Okay. Okay, she has appeared on the screen and is now unmuted. So Esther, welcome.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, I was a little disappointed when I found out from many people last week that people were invited, and it was assumed that, I guess, Nancy was invited too, and that I wasn't invited. Ann Walker and Mr. Richard Gamester. And so I guess I just decided to jump on today because I was a little concerned about things that were being said. I do have opinions about all this. I think some of the situation, I would agree that there should be an investigator, but I think the investigator should come, an impartial investigator, maybe should be at the very beginning to make sure that the people making the first decision, the mayor and the counselor, or the mayor and the city attorney, have all the information. So I believe that was not the truth when I went through mine, to make an appropriate decision. I also think there should be ample opportunity when that decision is being put forward to have both parties have time to prepare. I was given 24 hours and 3 minutes notice at 5 in the afternoon that there was going to be a meeting about this the next day, which I thought was very unfair. And I had not been given the full complaint at that point. I was given a phone call by Mr. Sullivan that there would be a meeting at the fire station. So that is of ample concern to me. I also believe that some of the other concerns that took place, and as I shared with Attorney Sullivan the other day, that I have been totally quiet about it on purpose. I chose not to make it an election issue. I chose not to bring it because the number of people that were involved that were running, I didn't think it was right. And I did not want to take it down as a citizen issue. But I do believe that there are a lot of problems with the process. One of the other problems was that and I don't know how much of it's problems because we were on Zoom or how much of it then we couldn't be live, but I do know that a vote was taken by the ethics committee, and two people that chose to vote both said they had not received the information. It's right on camera. I chose not to put that in my video that I presented to the council because I chose to only to have those people that made the complaint in the video. And I know those people, but they both voiced that they had not received the information, and yet they made a vote. During the conversation we had, we were asked if there were people in the room with us and to name those people. People were not truthful about that, so there was no control over that. There was no ramification. My only option was to go to higher courts, which I was trying to avoid because of the number of people that were involved in it. But I do believe when there was information asked, was someone in the room and you can see someone in a mirror, that causes question. So again, I'm not sure how much it was because we're on Zoom and we weren't live, but I do believe that the process was flawed once the decision was made to go forward. I believe that that the evidence was not looked at. As people were shocked in the city when I did the video and showed the actual evidence. And I do think that there should be qualities and qualifications and decisions on who should be involved in the process. Do we have attorneys? Do we not have attorneys? Do we have how much time and before you have to put your case together? Do you have more than 24 hours and 3 minutes to prepare and even free yourself up? I had to change a graduate class that I was teaching at the last minute because of getting a 5 o'clock phone call. Or actually, it was 5:47 or something like that for a 6 o'clock meeting the next night. So I think there's a lot to the process. I also think that I was told by one of the people that chose to move it forward, said that if he knew all of it, he would have not moved it forward, but he was not given the information ahead of time. And he was not, he didn't have anything to go on except for one letter from the person that made the complaint. He had nothing from the other person that the complaint was about. So only thing he could go on is what was the complaint was made. So I think if you're looking at truly the ethics code, you should think of maybe both sides when a complaint is made. The other complaint has, the person the complaint is made on has, 72 hours, 5 days to file a rebuttal so that when the city attorney and the counselor is making the decision to move it forward to the ethics committee, that all that is taken into account. So both sides are heard, not just one. So I really feel that, again, I've chosen to kind of keep quiet, even though I know I've had many attorneys offer to take it higher because they felt, but my reputation was not hurt that much. And I did not feel, I felt what I did was a whistleblowing kind of situation, and I stand by that. As I shared with many people, I tried. As I provided evidence, I tried, and no one was listening. So I would encourage moving forward, if you're really going to look at the process, look at the whole process. And I would encourage you to really make sure that there was no oath taken. So I could show you in videos that I've captured the difference between what was said one week and what was said another week by certain people, and how different their story changed during during the ethics board litigation. So technically, I could, if there was an oath taken, we could hold them accountable for not being truthful. So I guess all that needs to be decided if you are going to go after people, or if you're going to question people, or if you're going to look at the evidence. You know, it's pretty sad when you talk to a city attorney 4 days, or right when the complaint was made, and he didn't see anything wrong with what I had done and how it affected the ethics, and then all of a sudden I get back up. So again, there was a conflict, I think, with city attorney being a counselor. That might be need to look at. But if we're really gonna go down the rabbit hole here, then let's go down. And let's really look at every aspect of it. And let's look at the truths of how we make sure the truths can be upheld. The one thing we need to be real clear of is that this is just a support board. Actually, the council vote means more to the courts because they're elected. And I think that you need to decide what everyone's role is. You cannot have people make a decision about someone's life, which was what they were doing, and not say they can say publicly they had not looked at the evidence and had not even received it yet, and then made that decision. I'd like to stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. I think we basically are taking your suggestion in looking at the whole process. I think that by having outside counsel be the first person to, well, there has to be a internal process, and that established process is the mayor and the city attorney at this point. But then it goes to an outside ombudsman. I don't know, we don't have a title for it, but basically a person that is trained in ethics and would be on retainer by the city to then take over the process, have full rights of discovery and research, and create a report that then goes to the ethics committee, which is selected again by drawing names out of a hat from the council, from the fire commission, police commission, school board. And then we also suggested that there be a fifth person, basically a resident at large, be part of that committee as well.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
I think the information collection that you were talking about there, before it goes to the ethics committee, should be done before it even goes to the mayor and the legal, the person that makes the original decision,
Well,
whether it goes forward.
that's a good suggestion, and I think we could look at that. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Who is this?
This is Arthur Clow, and I had submitted 2 ethics complaints relatively the same time as Nancy Pearson's. And first of all, the city attorney told me that it was pretty much the standard of how you should write an ethics complaint, but my ethics complaint was about conflict of interest, and I was told that it could not go forward because the board that the 2 people were acting from was not named in the ethics ordinance. So in other words, if you need to have universal coverage for unethical behavior in the city of Portsmouth. I have some other comments, but that's the first one that I have. I don't know if I need to wait till public comments to to say a few other things about the ethics proceedings, or whether I could do so now. I was as much a participant, and I reject Nancy Pearson's idea that, you know, she didn't have the resources to be able to put together an ethics complaint. I have less college education than Nancy Pearson, and I put together a multi-page document with facts, etc. And had I been able to be heard, I would have presented my case. That what I've heard today is the idea that we take away and make optional the complainant putting the case forward. Nancy Pearson had people coaching her in the room, and a blind eye was turned to the help that she was getting in the room. You know, there were conflicts of interest by people that were sitting on the ethics board. One of the people on the ethics board ended up using the services with his nonprofit for the New Hampshire pop-up. So we had conflicts of interest on the board. You've got to start off with a clean board. You've got to assure that people get their due process, and for the meeting to have occurred via Zoom and to have seen the activity of people involved in the meeting on the cameras and how they were reading messages from other people was very strange when the fire department was still having in-person meetings. So I am concerned that you need a bigger hearing with more people involved about how to handle the ethics complaint. It's a personal risk to sit down and write an ethics complaint. For me, it's also emotional and difficult, time-consuming, and it can be heartbreaking to know that it's a political process. I think that what was done to Councillor Kennedy was really derivative. The point wasn't proven. Her counsel was criticized for his tonality. He wasn't listened to. Councillor Kennedy is not as astute at doing presentations over Zoom, but in an in-person meeting would have been more fair, and we would have had, and it would have been nice to have held people accountable for misconduct, which Nancy Pearson clearly did by having people in the room and not announcing it. So I think that the idea of taking it out of the hands of people or having city staff or somebody else write up ethics complaint goes against everything. And by the way, I agree with Esther. You know what you all need? You need a whistleblower protection policy, which the city doesn't have. Esther Kennedy was a whistleblower, and you had a problem where the city was doing services, putting money into Pop-Up New Hampshire before they were even an organization. There was no contract. They had a fiscal agent before they were an actual entity. There were multiple ethical problems with the way that the council executed their agreement. That's a problem. This was just a political witch hunt. Very disappointing, and we're fortunate that Councillor Kennedy did not take legal action against the city for violation of her rights of due process.
Thank you, Arthur. I guess we are looking at the whole ordinance, and I appreciate your comments. This is just the first draft of what we've talked about. So this is an ongoing process for this committee.
Councillor Cook.
Yes,
I just
Councillor
would
Cook.
add two.
Wait a minute, Councillor Cook first.
Yep.
Me? I wanted to clarify that at our last session of governance, and just so everybody knows, I only invited the committee to attend that session after a discussion with the deputy city manager who's there today. I decided just to invite the committee members for their initial input rather than the individuals involved in the last ethics process, mostly because I didn't want to have two different parties at the same meeting rehashing what occurred during that process. And I decided to hold off on that, and Nancy Pearson appeared on her own, apparently because of public notice. So I just want everyone to know that, and I'm thrilled that Esther showed up today and Arthur Close showed up today so that we could include them also in the process.
Thank you. Counselor Tabor?
Yeah, I'm grateful to Artie and Esther for being part of this. We're just trying to get to the best process. I think the timeliness of notice for the defendant that Esther brought up is very important. I take it from her comments that it was 24 hours and 3 minutes before the meeting of the assistant mayor and the city attorney, rather than the ethics committee itself. I know as the ethics committee tried to give both the complainant and the defendant time to prepare their cases, and we paced the meetings that way. We also had a 30-day deadline that we had to achieve that's in the ordinance. And then we did try to give first the complainant and then the defendant an entire night to make their case, and each side got to cross-examine the other. So we really did try to get as much due process as we could. You know, the issues about who was in the room and so forth, I think the question would be, would that have changed any of the testimony? I thought we did get pretty full and fair testimony. We did our best to do that. I think that the third-party independent investigator would enable a lot of facts to be gathered in a neutral way, favoring neither the complainant nor the defendant, but to gather the facts and say, do these facts match what our ethics ordinance says a violation is? So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Can I make this a point of clarification?
Okay.
The clarification point is, Councilor Tabor, the meeting was the night that you were bringing everyone together. That was a public, you were bringing people together over at the fire station.
Okay.
So the
Yeah,
first
so
I heard
that's-
of that was less than 24 hours, well, right at the 24-hour and 3-minute mark. I was like saying to Attorney Sullivan, I cannot believe we're doing this so quickly like this. Can we do it Friday? Can we do it any other time? Because I had a graduate class.
Okay, so that was the first convening of the ethics committee, before we started to hear each side individually.
Right.
But your point's well taken. Your point's well taken. There should be enough time for anyone, either party involved in this process, to prepare what they need to prepare.
Yeah, and I think that the idea of having somebody who is trained in ethics, somebody who can be neutral, I don't know that a mayor's appointment is going to be neutral necessarily, would be really important, because what we saw with third parties in the room and people sending messages with the complainant sitting behind a screen would have been what in a trial world would have been a mistrial. It would have been misconduct during by the person making the complaint would be a mistrial, if not an acquittal, dismissal with prejudice. So I think we do need that professional, because I don't know what kind of people, what kind of training people have. Ethics is a huge part of my life because I work in banking and I have to deal with HIPAA and banking regulations and ethics out the wazoo. I go through a criminal background check, multiple levels, drug checks, credit checks. Every time that I get a job, I have. Ethics training is really common for me, but I'm not saying that everybody who sits on an ethics board is going to have a similar idea of what's ethical and what isn't.
Thank you, Arthur. I guess it's probably fair to ask if Petra Huda is here, if this is why she's here and she wants to speak, since we've taken on commentary from other people as well. So I will.
Yes, sir, I do. Petra Huda, 280 South Street. I don't know if I'm on. I guess the first thing, I don't know where you are in your meeting, if you are through your action items, and I didn't think you were. I thought you had some more to go. But I will, first I guess I'll address the ethics part of this. In watching last time's meeting, I guess I would ask the chair, Cook, Councilor Cook, I was very disappointed just to find out that you had only invited half of the group to participate in this. I mean, basically the best process is to get input from both sides at the same time. So that was very disappointing. I guess the next thing I would ask, by the proposals you're putting forward here, who's going to pay for this? In listening to Councilor Pearson, former Councilor Pearson last time, it was like the public was going to pay for this because she couldn't figure out how to do a complaint. She wanted the city staff to do this for her. That's very concerning to me because I'm a taxpayer, and when somebody brings a complaint forward, the burden, like it says, is on them to prove what their complaint is actually about. So that would be a question I would ask that I think needs to be discussed here. I guess the other thing here that should be brought out that was discussed last time in detail is I don't think you're considering the charter here anywhere. The fact that the request was made for the committee to recommend punishment or actions over the council was a little disturbing, as it is right in the charter. The governing body is supposed to do this. So I think you need to take all these facts into consideration and please review the charter on that count. Also, I guess I would like to make some comments on the rule changes that were suggested today, and I left my paper.
Can we finish with, let's see, do we want to go into that at this point? I guess we're in the middle of the ethics discussion right now,
Right.
and maybe we can do that at public comment.
Okay, so I guess you need to figure out when public comment is,
Well,
because you guys are,
it's number 8 on the agenda.
okay,
Okay.
thank you.
I just want to reiterate that the ethics process is under review. There are many facets, and it's a complex issue. It's regulated by state statute, it's regulated by our charter, and it's regulated by our rules. And so we're just really beginning our deliberations on this. I think, as Councilor Cook said, no one was invited to the meeting other than this committee, but because it was a publicly noticed meeting, Nancy Pearson joined, and others joined. I want to ask if there are any other comments from the committee members about the ethics at this point.
Yes, Councilor Lombardi, one of the other items we took up with Bob Sullivan was, should the council, if they receive a finding of an ethics violation, be compelled to take action? And he ultimately said any council could, if there were a requirement like that, could redo the ordinance. So probably in the end, it's left to the voters to decide based on how the city council acts. And that's in the memo that he sent. And I think that covers the major points of what we discussed.
Yes.
So just a couple of points. So first off, I can confirm what Councilor Cook stated, which was the thought was originally to get input first from the ethics board members in the first instance, and then to get the input from others who participated in the process to the extent they felt comfortable discussing it in a public setting. So there was definitely no intention to exclude. It was a question of timing and letting, kind of rolling it out on the slow process of how to gain perspectives on how to make this a better process, because I think everyone agrees we could have a better process. So there was no exclusionary intent. It was more of a sequencing. Second, I too was kind of noodling over the question of, how do we pay for, how often would we engage an ombudsman if this is the path that the city council chooses to go down. It certainly has advantages of bringing in that neutral third party. I think what you probably still need is some, what I call, because of the cost. So assuming that that cost is coming out of the city budget, you still probably want some housekeeping device to make sure something at least has enough merit that it warrants some action. That's, again, my first thought, subject to, continuing to take comment and perspectives on this before you send something out. But, yeah, so, yeah. And certainly we may want to change the timing issues. On the one hand, it's nice to have these wrapped up sooner rather than later. On the other hand, it is important that people feel like they have adequate time to prepare, and sometimes that can be done simply by agreement of the parties. There may be a situation where some parties prefer to have matters heard sooner rather than later to kind of air the issue, and others may prefer more time to, because they have other things going on in their life and they're not worried about, they want more time to prepare. So maybe some flexibility with regard to that aspect. But
Chairman Lombardi, I would just like to apologize for the fact my camera was off my computer and I didn't realize it until this now. So I don't know what you guys were looking at. I think my tea bags and maybe some other stuff. So I apologize. Thank you.
Okay. That's quite all right, Esther. Thank you.
Yeah. Can I add, I really like this idea of having an outside ombudsman, and I like the suggestion we've received to consider having that take place before an ethics complaint even reaches the mayor for determination, that there be some outside review before it even, the determination is made whether or not to refer it. But at the same time, I think the deputy city attorney and city manager is reasonable in suggesting that we do have some kind of mechanism before we hire anyone, because again, that is a cost. So it is something to consider if we're paying an outside ombudsman or to review a process. There has to be some mechanism to make sure it warrants referral to the ombudsman for recommendation for the city manager and the mayor to recommend whether or not we should even go into this information gathering process. But I'd like where this is going. I like kind of this direction of moving to an information gathering process that doesn't necessarily involve the committee doing all of that work specifically. Because again, this is a committee of elected representatives who don't necessarily have the direct experience on information gathering. And it's a huge burden on that committee, whereas if we had somebody outside that process, which is the proposed solution, I think that it would be a much more fair process.
Thank you. And I just correct, you said city manager, but it's city attorney and the mayor. Any other comments on the ethics process? Okay, well, thank you everyone for their participation in that. It's not an easy process to get a handle on because there are so many levels of legal responsibility, from state to state statute to city ordinance. So anyway, so we are working on it, and I appreciate all the comments. Our next agenda item is City Council contact process, email, and the legality of responses. And I'm not sure where this is going, but I know I brought that up and just in wondering about whether we get a lot of emails through the web page, and I asked the question of if a city councilor answers an email that is addressed to all councilors, does that mean, or does that imply that that councilor is responding for the council? And that was a legal question, so I guess I will present that to the Deputy City Manager.
So the answer is no. If you're responding, as an individual counselor, it's my view that, that'll be enough, I think, to flag, so you just, and I'm sure that has, that's quite the common practice where individual counselors will respond back, thank you for your concern, and I will or will not do something with that concern depending on what's expressed. And I don't think that's generally taken as an act of the council because it's one city councilor. And I'm assuming you're not copying your council mates, that you're simply responding individually to someone who's raised a concern that they'd like you to take seriously. Mm-hmm.
So I guess I think people are following this, but it might be noted that one should not reply all.
Correct. Correct.
just because of that.
Yes, we don't want email conversations among a quorum of the counselors, so that would be 5 or more. So generally, the individual responses back to a concerned resident is perfectly appropriate, but not copying all your council mates. If it's something that you think belongs on a city council agenda, there's a process for bringing it forward.
Great. Thank you very much. Hi,
I
Kate.
should say, I'm keeping a list of all the things that I think would be valuable information for new council orientation and also for volunteer orientation. And so this is one of those issues where I put on the list of items that it would be very valuable for new city councilors to always know the rules around responding to email and avoiding any violations of right to know by creating a quorum accidentally.
Thank you. All right, priorities for next meeting is our next item on the agenda. I presume that ethics is one of them. And I think basically the continuation of the work we've been doing. And if there's anything else that we need to look at this point, I'd be happy to hear it.
I think it's also a goal to, hopefully we'll have the rules, at least the majority of the rules, in some format where we can send them to the council after our next meeting. I think several of them, the changes are pretty minor, and we could recommend changes move forward at the council level. I know we have a few that we're still working on. I think it's reasonable to send the ones that are simple changes to the council and then continue to work on a few of the rules that may need additional changes.
Okay, good, thank you. So we should plan on meeting in person, be sure to meet in person so we can take a vote. All right, public comment. And I know Petra had wanted to.
May I?
Yes, please.
Okay, one thing while it's still fresh in your minds, I'd like to make a comment on Councilor Barty's question on the emails. One thing that recently happened in the prior council is in August, the city manager and city clerks were put on the city council email list. When somebody writes in as anybody, as a resident or anything, that is not apparent to them. So my question to you is, in the efforts of transparency, I would like to see this listed somewhere, that when somebody writes in and says, write to all the council, that they are made aware that the city manager and clerks are also on that email.
Okay, I think that's not unreasonable.
Okay, the next thing, I guess, I want to, if I may, give you some feedback on what happened in the rules discussions. One thing on the discussion of the order of business, Rule 7, I think one of the big things that is missing here is the division between the governing body and the administration of the city, which happens through the city manager. When you, as suggested by Councilor Cook, if you combine all this together, you do not have a separation of what the governing body needs to be discussing and what the city manager, as the administrative head of the city, is bringing forward. So I would ask you to consider and think about the governing body being separated from the duties that are required of the city manager. From that point when you're discussing that. Also, I guess on Rule 13 and 14, I would ask you to consider how these are affected by Robert's rules. especially in the motions and the motions for debate. All of this is listed and defined in Robert's rules, so I'd ask you to take consideration of that also, and maybe not double up on what is already there. Then we get back to taxing and spending. I think as far as rule number 32, a lot of this is discussed in the charter on spending that is not in there and how appropriations work, who can move appropriations. And the one thing that, and I know a lot of people aren't aware of this is an accounting thing. You cannot put a liability on the books in a dollar amount when you have no idea what it is. So asking that something where you can't describe the amount and just saying it's anticipated is not something that you can just throw in the books from the accounting perspective. Mm-hmm. So the request was made in prior council on this by Councilor Lazenby numerous times. And when the city attorney came forward, he was correct, absolutely correct, in saying we don't have any measurement of this, we don't have any probability of this happening. That is right in the accounting rules also. So I think that's something that needs to be said here. Also, addressed by the public. I'm glad you left that alone. Number 41, that was good. In your discussion on Rule 43, the comment session and the public dialogue, it seems to be coming out here that the whole purpose of all of this is to make all of the public input and all of the sessions that you have at the convenience of the council. What seems to be lost here is the public. And the purpose of all these public sessions is to get public input. And the statement I'd just like to make about the discussion on just making 3 counselors present for any kind of public dialogue session, based on their workload, basically, is, I think that is taking away from the knowledge base that the public would be discussing with. When a resident comes and has an issue, they like to have you would say the most knowledgeable counselors in attendance, so they could discuss this one-on-one. And myself, I would have a problem with having only 3 counselors selected by the mayor at a certain time there, where you don't know the subject, and you don't know if you have the most knowledgeable counselors there representing the governing body. So that would be a concern of mine also. And I think that would be it. The only other question or concern I would have is please look at the interface of the city charter on all these rules, as deputy city manager could voice for. The charter is the first rule of business, and then it comes down to your rules of order and your policies. So that's all I have to say about that. I'd also like to address the subject of non-public meetings and non-meetings. In our session, we had Mr. Splain, we had Mr. Lazenby, and they were very quick to remind us as a council when we were going into a non-public session or we were having a non-meeting. The meeting of 2/22 of the council, in sitting back and watching that, We had a few problems there with process and with the timing of motions put forward. The example would be during the point in time where the city manager was doing her presentation on outdoor dining, a discussion ensued. The councilors went back and forth, and right in the middle of that, Councilor Bagley made a motion. That motion was not on the agenda. You were not in a section where motions were being made. That motion was discussed. Many amendments and friendly amendments were made during that time. It got to the point where the words from the mayor were, we've been here for 4 hours, let's go in the back and take a recess and come out with a motion here with the amendments. At the advice of Councilor Splain and Councilor Lazenby, that was a non-meeting. And it was a non-announced non-meeting. Or you can actually say it was a non-public, because the public was not aware that that was going to happen. It was not listed in the agenda. And I urge you to look at the proceedings that happened, and as you do that, in the future, please note, because the rest of us who had to abide by all of this are watching, and we were held to a different standard, obviously, than is here now. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, any other business?
Hello? Hello?
Oh, all right, sorry. I didn't see you on there. Just one person,
Hi,
please.
Vincent.
Zlita, why don't you go first?
Thank you. I want to thank you all for the time, for your work on these important issues. And I wanted to
another
share
meeting here
a
from
little
you,
bit of
so-
my thoughts on ethics. There has been a lot of discussions on the process, but historically, we fail on training decision makers on ethics. This is historic. This is not new. And when I was in the council and I brought this up, I shared with then city manager John Bohenko the name of even a company out in California with a robust ethics, because ethics is something that evolves. The situations change, the challenges are different at each year, and in my view, it's not real. It's inconceivable that we have elected officials, appointed officials, and department heads without adequate ethics training. And when I talk about ethics training, I'm talking about it's a mindset. It's not just a paper exercise. It is a mindset. So I would like to bring that. I really think that the way this whole thing is run is flawed. I want to thank Councilor Cook for allowing Esther to speak today on the ethics, and for the openness to take some of the suggestions made to improve the process. I also would like to talk about public comment. We know this for sure, that the person who controls information controls the power. So public comment has been, in my experience, was one of the most incredible experiences, not only because I heard, but because I knew the larger audience was listening to it. So it wasn't just a moment when we in the council were listening or receiving input from residents. But it was also a moment where others beyond that room, beyond where we were listening, and they could think. And where we have a very limited, reliable media in our city, we know that. I think it's important that our citizenry has access to listen to all views in a very transparent way, which does not happen during the dialogue. And I'll give you, I've witnessed the most obnoxious and unacceptable behavior from city councilors during dialogue, interrupting residents speaking because they did not agree with what our resident was saying. So it's out of sight, out of mind. So when those notes come from when the city clerk is reading the notes from the dialogue, it has been sanitized. You have not seen the body language of males stretching their hands with the five, like the stop sign, or raising their voices to silence people, So it's a different dynamic. There are pluses to it. I agree there are people who feel more, at home if they are not in front of a camera and they are just in that environment. But if not properly set up, there are lots of things that will be out of sight of people and nothing is done about it.
I have to.
So I will encourage to keep public comment.
I have to interrupt you.
I
I'm
will
sorry.
encourage to keep.
The room is no longer ours.
The room is no longer ours.
So I appreciate your comments, and I feel unfortunate, just as you're saying that people are rude to people making comments, I feel like I'm being rude in making a comment. But we have people waiting for this room. This meeting has gone over, and I think we have to move to continue this meeting at our next meeting, or continue this agenda at our next meeting.
Okay, so we need to wrap it up so that,
So we need to wrap it up. I appreciate everyone's input. We have important issues here, and I do appreciate, and I think we all appreciate, the comments that people have made. We have some other business, but as I say, I think we need to move that to our next meeting. So if I can get a motion, I can't
well, you
take
can't get a
motions.
motion, we can just adjourn.
So I guess we need to adjourn.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Yeah.